Today we're going to do part 3 of our workflow session, which is initializing and completing workflows. So just to get recap as to how we got to here, we started off by we configured our workflow settings. So we made sure that our core configuration settings are what we wanted them to be. We built our workflow template, so actually creating our series of tasks which assign review and approval activities to different users. And then we attach that template to a schema so we can get ready to roll. So now we are ready and it's time to run our workflow. So with no further ado, let's get into our live demo session. I'll be using the FileHold desktop application for today's sessions. We can see the desktop app over here. I know last time we used the web client, but this time I want to stick with the desktop app just because I prefer using it generally, but it's also, this is where I got everything I need. And I want to show you a major change that I made. If you watched our last session, you'll know that I created our workflow that routed to all kinds of different people. So I'm going to go into my workflow templates. If I'm not sure which one the last one I touched was, I can just come up here to last modified, resort my list, and then I can select my invoice approval for DMS Workshops. That's one we built last time. And I've modified this to make myself, as the workflow initiator, the participant in every activity. Now, the reason I've done that is because if I send this to other people, I'd have to log off and then log back in as that other user. And although that's fine, it does take time within the webinar, and I don't want to bore people by watching them, by making other people watch me try to type different passwords in each and every time I try to log in and out. So just for simplicity's sake, I've made myself the only participant in this 4-activity workflow. So this is going to seem a little abnormal because every time I complete a task, that task is going to reappear to me as the next activity in my workflows. But that's okay. I just want to let you know that this is what I've done here for my system, and that's what we're going to be looking at for today. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and just cancel that because I haven't made any changes. I want to show that to you, and I'll close my workflow templates management window. And here I have my documents, which are all invoices in the system. And I have my series of invoices. And now I want to route one of these through a workflow process. Now you can see I've got a custom view on this. So you can see over here, I've got my invoices view, and I've done this by invoice number, invoice date, and the invoice total. And then, by the way, I've also included my approval status over here, so I can see which of these have and have not been submitted for my approval. If you're also wondering, I've done a grouping onto this by each of the customers' names. So Cloud VPS is a company. These are their 3 invoices. Contoso Asia, these are theirs. Polychemtex, this is theirs. You can see some different ones here because the names are actually slightly different. One's got a dot, one doesn't. This is a good reason to use controlled lists, by the way. It's supposed to have people type the values in like I did. But this is a good, this is just the layout that I want to see because I can see what my document status is. This is ideal. So now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to take one of my documents. So we'll take this one here, and we're going to now put this into workflow. I could have initialized the workflow by adding the document in if that was a setting that I chose within the schema. In this case, I'm going to manually start my workflow. So I'm going to take my document, I'm going to right click onto it, go into our workflow option here, and we will select initiate invoice approval for DMS Workshop because that's the template that I want to initialize. You'll notice I could also initiate test or initiate invoice approval. Those are options that I could have also chosen. But of course, for today, we're going to do the process that we built in our last session. So we'll choose initiate invoice approval for DMS Workshop. All right, new window is going to pop up here, and this is my workflow template that you're going to see. This is similar to what we saw last time. Of course, when we're using the web client, this has a bit more color to it. It's a bit more visually appealing, but here's the key difference to this. Unlike last time when I was using the template, I could modify all of those different fields. Here, now that I'm initializing it, most of this is locked out. So you'll see that I'm grayed out here for things like whether or not it's a 1 of X or a forced reservation. That's been taken away from me because now I'm just initializing. But where I allowed the initiator to define, I can still make changes into that. So I come over here to the due date and I could change this from 2 days to 3 days if I needed to. Or I could say, you know what, actually I need this by a certain time. So I'm going to say, let's get this by Monday at, and we'll do 5 p.m. if I wanted to. So I could actually put a timestamp into their specific time when I need this due by. And I can do this for any of the activities where I've allowed myself as the workflow initiator to make modifications to that. So if in this task, for example, I'm not allowed to change the approver, then I can't change that. I made the date changeable, so I can change that. I can also put comments into here. So I could have something, but here again, I've locked it out. So even though I'm typing, nothing's appearing under there because I've actually locked myself out of that screen. And again, this is just to initialize the workflow. This is the audit record of activity. Where it makes sense to make changes to it, allow the initiator to make changes to it. If I'd had, and I'll just, one last comment onto this, if I'd had no modifications to make to this, if there'd been nothing that where the initiator could have made changes, I would not see this screen when I initialize the workflow. Instead, it would just tell me the workflow has been initialized. Now that I've allowed the initiator to make changes, I've done those changes, let's go ahead and click OK. So now it tells me the workflow has been successfully initiated. It's been initiated, and it says you'll be returned to the folder view from where you started the workflow. To view the status of this, you can go to My FileHold Reviews and Approvals, and I'll show you all that in a second. But I'll just say OK to this. Now, if I hadn't had any allow initiator to define, this wouldn't have popped up. So we'll say OK to that. Takes me back to the screen, and here's my document. Notice my status here is pending approval. The one below this is not submitted for approval, hasn't gone through workflow yet. This one is now pending approval. This is one of my statuses for my document. So all my documents either be not submitted, pending, approved, or not approved. It'll be one of those statuses into there. Plus approval postponed, but we'll talk more about that in our next training session. So join us for some of those advanced functions. So now that we have this document in workflow, another thing I want to point out here is, remember, I'm a system administrator. I have full and total access to all parts of a document inside of FileHold, but my delete button has been disabled. While a document is going through workflow, it is under protection. So if you've looked ahead and you've seen what we're going to be coming in session 5, we're going to take a look at legal holds. And legal holds will actually protect a document from being modified because it's going through a workflow process. So we're going to talk about building that template and executing it to make sure that you can apply a legal hold to a document. So good subject for that one. That'll be session 5 coming up. So this one here, in this case, we just have it as pending approval, and because it's in workflow, it's locked out. Let's now go and take a look at our workflow section. Oh, before I do that though, I should probably just come onto this. Let's take a look at the metadata and file properties, because we can also get that deeper dive into it if I want to see what's happening with it as far as its approval statuses or any other details. And sure enough, here it says pending approval, and that's a link. And that link would actually take me over to my to the workflow status report if I wanted to see that. But I don't want to worry about that for right now. We're going to go over here to my reviews and approvals section of the FileHold library tree. So for those of you who've not seen that before, that's my reviews and approvals. So this is where my workflow statuses will appear. And we'll expand this out and we'll take a look. I've got my tasks and I've got a workflow status report. Let's start with my tasks. It's obviously got one in there that's telling me that I have a task. So I click onto this, and then this is what's going to appear for me as a list of my tasks in FileHold, including my custom name that I put onto this. So here's my workflow. It's got for the Anconia Corporation. This is the document I just put into there. I can see when it was assigned, and I can see when this activity is due. I also have this window down here, and you may not see this when you first open up your workflow status report or your My Tasks. In fact, what you might see is this. I personally love having that window down there. I keep it open all the time. So if I didn't want to, what I'd do is I would click on Show Documents, and then it would have a list of the documents that I have associated with this. I then clicked this here, which is the pin. In this case, it's pin, so the option for me is to unpin, but I suggest you might want to pin this so that when you select a workflow, the document or documents associated with it appear down here. When I have the workflow task selected, a lot of these are going to be either blank or available for me, depends on what buttons I have. When I click the document down here, however, my taskbar now opens up to whatever options I have in the taskbar. So I've only given the option here to make a local copy, to download the document, or if I want to do a checkout, if I have checkout allowed. Remember that was an explicit permission that I had, the ability to check a document out. That's not given to me, so therefore in our workflow template, so therefore it's been grayed out. If I right click on this document, you're going to see some limited other options here. So for example, delete, rename, those, checkout, those are grayed out, but I do have a lot of my other options by right clicking on the document. So if the buttons aren't available, you can still right click to get a lot of access to things. Of course, there's a lot of functions that simply will not be available. I can't send this document to the archive right now because it's under workflow, so it's restricted from being able to do that. So just to give you an example of some of the things you can do. I can still see all of its metadata and file properties, by the way, as well, so I still have access to all that information. Now let's take a look at my task itself. So we can see it's a review task. There's an asterisk beside it. The asterisk indicates this is a 1 of X task. So this means that I'm going to be working on this with somebody else. Workflow name, if I hover my mouse over top, a tooltip appears to give me the rest of the name. So you don't have to worry about stretching windows too much or too often. On behalf of is empty because this has not been delegated. If I delegated this task to another user, then it would appear here under the on behalf of, and I would see who it's been delegated on behalf of. Task instructions gives me the full information here. This is the same information that I put into the documents task instructions, so that's why that information is there. Who initiated it, when it was assigned, when it's due, and what its status is currently in progress, and then finally our show documents button. Now I can also delegate the task from here if I want to send this to somebody else because I'm not going to be doing it. I can view the workflows if I want to take a look at that same window that I saw before with the different bubbles in it. And automatic refresh of tasks is enabled. This is turned on. It's been turned on by default. You might be dealing with an organization where you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of workflow tasks per day. So every time you load this, it keeps populating more and more icons into here. So we built this into here so that you don't get overwhelmed by tasks being added to you. You can focus on the ones that are there and then refresh the tasks when you're done. So in this case, automatic refresh is enabled because I'm not going to be getting a lot of tasks today, not a lot to be disrupted with. Now, if I want to see any more information about this, I'm going to go to my workflow status report. This is over here, and this is an automatically generated list. So this is a list of all active, completed, and canceled workflows to which you are a participant or if an initiator for the workflow. If you own the folder as a cabinet administrator, if you own the cabinet where the folder resides, you will also see all of those workflows here. Also, if you've been set as an observer to the workflow, we'll talk about that more in our next session, then you will also see that here under your workflow status report. This is an automatically generated list. I didn't have to query it, and it shows me what my tasks are. Now, again, I have some tools up here. We'll come back and look at this in a second. I just wanted to expand this so that we can see the individual steps. So activity 1 is a review activity, then an approval, and a review activity. It doesn't give me the task instructions because that's not the point of this. The point of this is to show me what steps of activity is this document going to go through. And we're currently in progress and 0% complete. All right, let's head back to the My Tasks. And let's go ahead and see what our options are as far as the workflow itself goes. So my screen loads up here. I've got my workflow selected, and all my buttons are grayed out except for this one, which is the Reserve Undo Reservation tool. Remember, I set this as a 1 of X task when we built this. So therefore, I want to reserve this to make sure that people know I'm working on it. So I click onto this. It just wants me to confirm if I want to reserve this. This is one of those ones that I don't usually show this message, so feel free to click the don't show this message again, and then we'll say okay, and I've now reserved this task. So this task is now over to me, status is reserved, and we have a green lock sign to show that's here. So I could click that again to undo that reservation to put it away. And now I have my activity itself, which is a review activity, and clicking on this button will open up a new window where I can now actually submit my review. Now, those of you who used our older version of workflow might be expecting to see 2 screens. We've gotten rid of one of those screens by putting those buttons up there to say this is the action I want to do. So in our submit review panel, we're going to see the same sort of feel to this when we do an approval task. This happens to be a review task. So it's here's the name of our workflow. This task has been reserved for you because I clicked that lock icon. Task instructions, review 1 document and 0 supporting documents, and then please review the invoice and attach PO number to the metadata field. So I've been given my instructions as to what to do for this. When I'm complete, I can then submit my review. Well, I didn't complete the PO number onto this, so let's just close this out, and we'll right click on our document. We'll open up our I don't actually have to open it because it's already here. Now, as it turns out, I forgot to add my PO metadata field to this for the demonstration today. So let's assume that it was there, and let's assume that I've added that value into it. So now that I've done that, I'm good to complete my review task. Nice job, Chris. It's going to look great on the video for later on. I'm sure somebody's chuckling themselves right now. Good. So we've completed our PO number that's on there. I forgot to include the POMD field. Whoops. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is what I'll call the PO number, just so that it's on there and I've at least got something cataloged towards it so I have some information onto it. And down here at the bottom are some other options that I want to show you quickly. One is that starting from the bottom, the workflow history. If I click this and click workflow history, it's going to expand to show me what activities we've done. So 8 minutes ago, we initialized the workflow, and that's how we got to this state. I can also turn on changes here, which I also like, as this shows me what's happened with documents. In this case, added the initial document, and we can see that there. So we can see 8 minutes ago, this workflow task was initiated. It gives me a bit of that history as to what's happened. Task details are also here in case I want to see anything like when it's due, whether checkout's allowed, or whether or not my password's required. And we know my password's not going to be required because this is a review activity. Review activities should not require passwords. So we can close our task details. Let's go ahead now and complete our review. We go to our finger icon again where it says review task, and we can go ahead and we can click that. By the way, this cancel here doesn't cancel the task. It simply cancels the window. It closes it out and takes me back. It does not cancel the workflow. So let's go ahead and review our task. Our submit review has now been submitted, and we're actually in a new screen now. I know it's still there in a line, but now instead of it being a review task, it's an approval task. And if I select my document, we'll see that we're still the same thing, no changes, still pending approval. The workflow is not completed yet, but I've moved on to my next task where I'm going to confirm the goods on the invoice were received and approve if payment can be made. So I've got my status that I can put onto that. Let's head over to our workflow status report and see what's different here. So we'll see that our status is now 25% complete. Let's take a closer look at this. So just like before when we saw our list of my tasks, workflow name, how many documents are, we'll talk about supporting documents in our next session. That's a really important detail, but we won't talk about it too much today. We'll just observe that there's no supporting documents. I can show the documents if I want it. So open up, this is not going to open up a window down below. It's going to take me to a different screen. So that's why that's a different way of generating that information. Go back to our status report, who initiated it, who started it, when it's due, and its completion status. By the way, this is completed by tasks. So let's say in my first activity, I had 2 participants in it. If one person completes the first activity and the second person does not, the status on that of completed will be 0%. Once the second person completes their task, if it's 4 tasks like this one here, then it'll be at 25%, just like this. So it's not counting how much of the task has been completed, just how many of the tasks are now completed to give us our 25%. Pending approval, and then I can view details. That's going to open up that same panel window that we saw before, where I can take a deeper dive into any of those functions. Again, I have visibility towards this because I'm an administrator, so therefore I get access to that. And then I can also look at the changes. So if I want to get a summary of changes like documents added or whatnot, I can see that. There's the same thing that we saw in the workflow bubble. There's some tools up here. Some are turned on or turned off depending on where I am within the workflow process. I can rename the workflow, usually a right that I have to do. I can cancel the workflow, which is something I have a right to do because 1, I'm the workflow initiator, 2, I own the cabinet, and 3, I'm a system administrator. So I've got 3 reasons why I could cancel this workflow if I wanted to. If I was a participant, I would not have that as an option. Clear completed, clear canceled, it just cleans out the list. And then I can print this list if I want to, or I can export this list as a CSV if I want to take a look at this somewhere else. Now, these other ones here are grayed out because I don't have those tasks open. So let's go ahead and expand this. And now I can select activity 2. And now some of these will become available, such as the ability to override a task. Override a task moves the activity to the next activity in the sequence, but does not mark the previous one as actually having been reviewed or approved. You'll see that my task 1 up here is marked as reviewed. This one here is in progress. If I was to override it, then its status would be overridden. Because it's not actually approving, it's moving it to the next cycle. If you're looking for a use case on this, let's say I have a company-wide policy on sensitive information, so I send an NDA to all of my staff, ask them to review it, and then to approve that they've done it. Well, 99 of my 100 staff did that. I got 1 person though who's away on sick leave. So I can't get them the task is marked as incomplete in the system, doesn't look great from my audit record. So what I do is instead is I override it. So it's at least completed to move on to the next task. And then later on, I will come back and complete that. So it's a patchwork solution. It's not used that often, but it's nice to know that it's there. I can also delegate this task if I wanted to send it to somebody else. I can do that here. Now you'll notice that reserve and undo reservation isn't available for me here because I don't have that this is an approval task. It's a 1 of 1 task. So therefore, that's not going to be as an option. But I, as a supervisor, as someone who's administrating this task, could delegate this to somebody or reserve it on somebody's behalf because I have a right to be able to do that as an administrator for the cabinet. An initiator could not do that, but as someone who owns the cabinet or as a system administrator, I could initiate this or reserve or undo the reservation on behalf of another user. Good. So that's done there. You can see my comment into here. So I forgot to include the PO metadata field. And if I click on that, it appears here. So if somebody writes a novel, I can still see that information if it doesn't fit on top of that line. Good. Let's go back to my tasks. Now we're going to do this one a bit more quickly. So we're going to open up the My Tasks again. It's going to give me a list of all of my available tasks. There it is. And then here's my entry down here. Now you'll notice I've got a thumbs up and I've got a thumbs down. Approve, reject. These are my two options that I have here. If I had postpone enabled, and we'll see that in our next session, then that would be here, but it's grayed out because it's not enabled onto this. Workflow task is selected. I'm going to choose my thumbs up. Let's approve this. Same window opens that we saw before, only this time we're submitting an approval. So if I scroll down again, I can see my initial, when it was initiated, the initial document was added, and then I can see my activity that was done, who completed the review, and their comment. So I forgot to include the PO metadata field. Whoops. So it's all included there and built into this now. Big difference here is this red surrounding this box. A password is required to complete this task. Use the password used to log into FileHold. So I need to authenticate against this as opposed to just completing this. One other quick comment. You'll see up here that there's choose attachment file if I want to add a file attachment to your approval. I had that option to another review. I forgot to mention it there. Now's a good time to mention it. This is where I can add additional supplementary evidence to FileHold as part of the workflow audit record. What this means is, unless I am a direct participant in the workflow, or the owner of the cabinet, or a system administrator, or an observer, I will not be able to see that attachment. This does not add the document in like we're familiar with adding documents where we tag them with metadata and store them within part of the library. This is literally attaching a document just to the workflow to say, I'm attaching this document to the workflow to demonstrate that this has evidentiary evidence towards why this decision was made. So if you need to attach a document that doesn't exist within FileHold and want to restrict its access, you can attach it as you can do an attachment file here. However, again, just thinking about use cases, if you're adding supplementary documents that you're not worried about other people seeing or already exist within FileHold, add them as a supporting document. I will show you that in the next section. I just wanted to indicate that here because supporting documents are typically, in my opinion, a better way to bring those documents over because it shows that clearer relationship between them. This is where I would use this only if I had a piece of information that I didn't want going to the general bank of FileHold, or it's something I only want referenced within this workflow process. Because we're not selecting a FileHold document, we're uploading a new document into FileHold, and we're attaching it only to the workflow. So we need a password in order to do this. Now, of course, I don't remember what my password is because, I'm a standard worker. So I'm just going to put this into here from my password manager. There we go. And let's go ahead and see if I got the right one. So give it the thumbs up. The window closes, and I've actually moved on now to my next activity. Let's head back over to the workflow status report just to show you that out there. So we'll expand this, and here we've got activity 1 reviewed, activity 2 approved. So my approval mark is put into there. Didn't put a comment, so nothing appears into this. Great, let's go back over here. We're going to now approve our next activity. We'll go ahead and do our thumbs up, put our approval into here. Let's just put a comment in here so I can see what it looks like when we go back to the status report. And again, we need our password, so we'll put that into here. And just to show you, again, we can see our history of what's happened over here. Approved task, off it goes. And we're on our last task of our workflow, which is to complete the remit the payment and close invoice in accounting software. So I've got my final piece of task instruction over here. Review activity. So passwords are not going to be required in this case. Isn't that nice? So it saves me having to worry about any of those functions. So I've got that part of it banked. Good. So here's my document in review. So let's go ahead and select it again. We'll complete our review activity. There we go. And now we can go and we can put our final comment into here, remitted and paid. Good, so there's my comment. And again, we can see our history down here. Let's go ahead and finish our review task. So no further activities here to do, so this appears empty. This is just a hangover because we had that loaded up before. But the next time I pop over to this, the documents associated with will be empty because there's no documents here. There's no tasks to be associated with. Let's go to our workflow status report. And here we can see our status is now approved. And if I expand this out, we get all of our options into here, including all of my comments. So we've now completed our workflow on our document. Everything's done. That's everything. So let's go now to our folder. We'll take a look at our document that's into here. We'll expand this out. Here's my approved document, and it's sitting in the repository. We're back to a red, yellow, green lights on this, and my ability to delete this document has been returned. Once the workflow has been released, the document is now able to be deleted, or whatever further actions I want to take. If I wanted to check this out, I could. An important note about checking out documents once they've gone through workflow. This status mark, this approval mark, is only going to be related to version 2 of 2. If I check this document out and bring it back in as a new version, that will then be version 3 of 3. And in that case, that document will not be approved. I cannot do what I like to call approval shopping by checking a document out and then putting that into a new workflow. So I can't get something approved and then go in and modify my document, so put into the contract and pay me $10 million into the contract and then resubmit into FileHold. That voids the approval that I have onto there. That version 2 is approved, but version 3, where I have my fraud going on, that's not approved. I have to put that back into workflow to get that reapproved into the process. So we can't change our status once we we can't retain our status once we change our version of the document. My approval status down here has an approved on it, and if I click onto that, it's going to open up with a new window that's going to show me who did their approvals onto this. In this case, it's both me with similar timestamps on them. My review activities are not included into this. A review activity is not an approval activity. It's not a sign-off on the document. It's simply a task you've asked someone to do. These are my true sign-offs, which it'll give me the workflow, it'll give me the information, but it doesn't give me the details, doesn't give me the any of the comments. None of that information is here. It's just the pure sign-off. And that's important because if somebody doesn't have a right to see the decision-making process, they don't get a right to see it. All they can see is who approved this, who actually did the sign-off. That is what we mean by the FileHold sign-off sheet. Let's go back over to our folder. Let's right-click on this document just to have a quick look at the different pieces of information here. So let's right-click onto this, and we'll take a look at our workflow. And you'll see that we've got the same initiate, so I could reinitiate this document to go through workflow again. I also have some other options here. I can view a sign-off sheet. That's what we just saw by clicking on this here. So it's the same function. Clicking on the approved over here is the sign-off sheet. View, review, and approval history is available to me as either the document owner or the workflow initiator, or as a workflow participant, or as the cabinet owner where the document resides, or as a system administrator. This gives me the right to be able to see this information, the same thing I saw under my workflow status report, only here it's my takeaway version of this. I have a right to see this because I occupy all of those roles that I mentioned before. I'm actually all those things at the same time. But this is the visibility to the actual details of this, what actually happened, the decisions that were made, the comments that were made onto this. I can get to all those details if I open up the review and approval status sheet, so I can see that piece of information to there. Now, if I also right-click onto this, I just want to point out I also have the option to add this to an existing workflow. So any document can always be put into a workflow as a second time. So for instance, up here, I have my Hamlet document, which is part of my test schema. So this is not associated necessarily with a workflow, but I could add this to an existing workflow and add this as a supporting document to a workflow that it doesn't have that workflow template associated with. And we'll talk more about that when we get to our session dealing with legal holds, because that's exactly the mechanism we're going to use, is adding documents as supporting documents into the system. So that is an example of running a document through a workflow process, taking a look at some of the information that's available in the workflow status report and the My Tasks, and how we can manage that document as it comes through. One thing that I did not show you in today is emails. One of the things that FileHold can do is generate emails when different events happen. We control that up here under File, Preferences and Settings, Workflow Preferences, and you'll see that I've got all these different functions that are available here. Now, what I didn't show you was what happens when I get an email notification, because I have mine turned off. It's a testing environment. So I'm going to turn on a task is assigned or delegated to me, just so that I can have that active, and we're going to apply that, and I'm going to say OK. And now let's go ahead and put this document back into workflow. I'm not going to complete the full process, but I do want to show you what the email looks like. So let's go ahead and send this off. I don't need to make any modifications to this because everything's good. We're just going to say OK. And again, it gives me the same notice before, workflow successfully initiated. Perfect. And we go back to here and we can see that our status on this document is still approved, even though it's going through a workflow, because we haven't lost its existing status. It's both pending approval and approved because it does have an approval mark on this, even though we put this back into workflow. So now that it's gone through workflow, it's going to generate an email. But because we're going to move at the speed of my email server, I'm just going to talk about what some of these other options that we saw over here under the workflow preferences. So in addition, there's all these different activities, and a lot of these are ones that you might not want to allow people to turn off like I did with mine. A task assigned or delegated to me is a really important one, and I think most people should probably be getting those notifications when they come out of the system. So that's an important one to try to get back out of your system. But you can control these as a system administrator from the preferences that we have in the system admin menu. And I'll come over to that in just a second to show you where that is. I can also set my email frequency. In my case, I have it set to immediate. So as soon as I do my workflow activity, I want that email to come out because I want that notification to come right away. But if you're going to be living in FileHold, if you're going to be someone who's going to be using it all the time for reviews and approvals, you might just want a daily summary because you don't want to get inundated with dozens and dozens of emails coming through all the time. Absolutely no value to that. You instead only want to get the key details when you absolutely need to get them. So you'll only get those comments when they come through. So you can do a single daily summary or even a weekly summary. So that instead of getting at the moment emails, hey, you're living in FileHold, you're going to see my tasks already. Why load yourself down with a bunch of spam? You can also do task delegation settings. This is where I can automatically assign all of my tasks to another user so that when someone initializes a new workflow, it doesn't come to me, it goes to somebody else. I'm going on PTO, I'm going to be gone for a week, I'm a key component in several workflows, so while I'm gone, automatically delegate these to somebody else. There is unfortunately no way to auto-delegate workflows to another user right now out of the box. That might be able to be done with a customization, but currently the way you would delegate is you'd have to manually reassign and redelegate a document to somebody else. But this is at least how I can set up my own delegation settings in the system. Well, it looks like my email functioning is not working properly right now because I'm not seeing any emails that have come through my FileHold system, which is a bummer because I wanted to show that to you. Let me make sure that's working for the next session so I can show them to you. One of the very cool things about the new interface with FileHold is that these buttons that are included here up top here are now actually included within your workflow email. So you could actually start your review or your approval process, even your, as I need to do in this case, which is my reservation, I could start it from the workflow so that instead of having to come here, I could actually immediately start my review or approval right from the email. It'll open up with that new window into there where I can immediately start the process from there. So that's everything that I want to cover for today's session involving initializing our workflow and completing workflow processes. In our next session, we're going to take a deeper dive into some of the advanced settings into this. So supporting documents, postponing workflows, converting to records, some of these much bigger functions. We're going to talk about those fully in our next session. So thanks so much for joining us for this session today. All right.